Hey guys, Rick Taylor with KS USA. Today we're going to talk about how to service your Rage Eye dropper post. Okay, so some of the basic tools that we're going to need to service KS dropper we'll go over here. If there are additional or specific or specialty tools for your particular model that we're going to go over, we'll discuss those in further detail a little bit later on in the video. So you want to start with a good quality biodegradable degreaser. We tend to like the simple green cleaners here. You can dilute them down to whatever ratio you want. They wash away easily, and they're not caustic or damaging. So a good degreaser. For lubrication, we recommend either the KS Post Paste, or if you don't have that available, the Slick Oleum is basically the same formula. It's designed specifically for suspension use, more specifically air oil systems, so it's a really good lubrication to use. We don't recommend using automotive grease because they tend to be a higher viscosity and can cause poor performance of your dropper if you use those. A pair of soft jaws so that you can hold the seat post. The one that we have here happens to have a round clamp hole in it, but if you can't find one of these in your local market, you can also do a V-block, which a lot of times you can get those from Amazon or from a local hardware store, a machine shop supply. Those kind of places have them. And essentially you just need something that you're going to be able to clamp and hold the tube. If you don't have access to that, don't panic. You can also use the bicycle frame to hold the post in place while we unthread the collar. We'll go over that in a little more detail later. Utility knife, we generally will use this just to help us remove the guide bushings. So these are handy to have. If you don't have one, you can do it by using your fingernail, but I'd recommend if you can find a utility knife, definitely grab that. A set of Allen wrenches. So you're going to need from a 6 down to a 1.5 millimeter set. So they can either be a T-handle like this, or you can have one of the little pocket folding ones work great too, but just make sure they're good quality so you don't end up rounding or stripping out any of the bolts. Last would be a strap wrench, and the strap wrench is basically to remove the collar. You'll need these on nearly all models of KS dropper, with the exception of the A12 Integra and the Rage Eye. So those two will use a little different system that we'll talk about later, but the strap wrench you can get from most hardware stores, and they're generally used for fitting pipes that you don't want to do damage to. So if they're a chrome finish or something, these allow you to grab and turn pipe without damaging the surface. So local hardware stores, and again, this is called a strap wrench. And then we definitely like to use a microfiber towel for cleaning and the internal parts and everything. These work really well with the degreaser. They tend to take all of the debris off of your post. So you can get these through most hardware stores, or if you have a Costco in your area, they do their Kirkland brand of towels that work really well. Okay guys, so for our Rage Eye, we're going to talk about how to service this one today. And first thing that I want to mention is there's a couple tools here that we didn't talk about in the beginning of the video. One is a pair of snap ring pliers. So you want to have ones for an internal snap ring. This set actually has multiple tips that comes in it, as well as internal and external snap rings. So you can get something like this from most hardware stores or auto parts stores. They have cheaper versions of it that just go one direction, either internal or external. So you could just get the internal one less expensively if you want to do that. Good tool to have in the shop anyway. The other tool is a press that you can either get from your local bike shop or you could probably kind of DIY one of these. The way you would do that would be to find a washer that fits just inside this tube, and a bolt and a nut. And instead of using this to stick in and turn to press everything out, you could put the bolt in and tighten it that way. So if you want to go that route, just take the post once you get it, the end cap out, take the post to your local hardware store and you'll find a washer that goes inside. We'll get into a little bit more detail later. Okay, and then the last thing, this would be something you'd get from your local bike shop, or if you're a shop, your local distributor. And so these are to retain the guide pins in place and the band bushing at the bottom when you reinstall this into the post. So in a previous video, we showed how to use like an aluminum can to wrap around and hold it in place. We do have these available through your local bike shop, so this is a preferred way to do it. We'll kind of quickly touch on how you would use that can to do it. So if you don't have access to these at your local bike shop, you'll be able to do it that way to service your post. So we'll get into the post here now. So first thing we're going to do is use our snap ring pliers. There's a snap ring here that we're going to just remove. The easiest way to get this out, once you get the snap ring dislodged, like that, and I'm just kind of pushing up very carefully on the actuator. Make sure you push up straight. Don't push at an angle because you'll break the actuator. And I've released the snap ring, so I'll set it aside. And now I kind of keep my hand on here in case this pops apart, but just basically tap it a couple times and you'll see that that now slides down. Now the way to get the actuator off of here is I just take the snap ring pliers and there's a hole right there that I grab and then I just rotate down, and you'll see the snap ring pliers work kind of like a pair of needle nose and goes right in there and pops those out. Okay, so we'll do that. Set those aside. Now you'll see those slide in kind of like a guillotine, and that circle there, when they're slid in, locks into a groove here. So that's the way that system works. So we're going to set it all aside for right now. Next thing I would do is take the push rod out so you don't lose that. Set it aside. Okay, now depending on which system you're going to use, if you're going to use the dealer purchased press, you'll want to compress this down, and I'll show you in a minute how to do that. If you're going to use kind of a homemade press, what you want to do is you want to find a washer, or maybe two washers so they're a little thicker, that just fit the inside diameter here, and you want to find a bolt that fits in the hole of that washer, and probably find a bolt that's about 75 to 100 millimeters long, and then you find a nut that fits with that. And what you would do is you would put the nut on the bolt. So put the two washers on, thread the nut on, and it's going to give you an arrangement kind of similar to this. So that bolt's going to touch the end here. You'll thread it all the way out on the nut. You put that in. When the washers are in, you put the snap ring there, and then you'll just turn that bolt. What we're going to show you how to use here is the dealer tool, which is kind of the preferred method. And what you want to do, sometimes this is a little hard to get it to do, but what I did there is I just pushed with the push rod down, and I compressed quite a bit of that shaft down inside. And then I just rocked it, still keeping pressure here. I rocked it to the side and let the push rod pop out. So now it's locked in kind of the compressed or short position. The reason I did that is that the hole in here is a blind hole, and it only goes in so far. So if we didn't do that, it would be really hard for us to get that to throw far enough and not hit the push rod. Okay, so I go ahead and put that in. And then you want to put your snap ring in. Now on the snap ring, when these are manufactured, they're stamped. So there's a radius edge, which you can feel with your finger, and then there's kind of a sharp edge. Always put the sharp edge of the snap ring on the side that's going to take the load, because what will happen is that radius, if you put enough load on it, that radius will allow the snap ring to compress and it'll bypass the groove. So if you put the sharp edge out where it's going to be pushed against, that'll lock it in and you'll never have that slip. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put this in, snap it in place, and then I like to just give a tap to make sure that it's properly seated. Okay, and this is a 10 millimeter on this tool. So you can see that popped out. You can slide this assembly. Now be careful as this comes apart because you've got the band bushing there, you've got your guide pins, and you've got your wiper and your upper bushing. So we'll set that aside for a minute. Let's go ahead and take the snap ring out. Set it aside. And we're going to set this press aside. We won't need that press anymore during this operation. Okay, so now let's go ahead and clean the mast tube. So we're using a little bit of our degreaser, a simple green in this case. And we can just use the handle of tool here to push that down in. Clean this out really good with the microfiber. Now I like to just kind of hold it up to the light and look inside and make sure there's no debris. Once I see that's clean, that's good, we can set it aside. Next thing we're gonna do is, I just like to use my thumbs to pull this back. Pull back the seal and the bushing, and you're gonna expose your guide pins. Now depending on the time of production for your particular post, you may either have a total of 6 pins like this that are metallic. You may have alternating pins that are metallic and POM plastic, or you may have a short pin that is metallic accompanied by a short pin that is POM. Regardless of which one you have, all of them work equally well. What you want to do is just pop these out. I use the edge of the utility knife here to pop those out. The important thing is to make sure that you don't lose any of them and put them back in the same orientation that you took them out, and also to inspect them and make sure that they're still cylindrical and there's no flat spots or undue wear on them. If they all look good, you can go ahead and reuse those. If there's flat spots or damage or wear, contact your local bike shop and they can get these for you. Next thing I like to do is I like to kind of pull these apart and separate the wiper from the DU bushing, or the, in this case, a POM bushing. Again, depending on production time of your post, you may or may not have this O-ring. So if you do have the O-ring, make sure you keep in mind where it's located, its position, and also if you don't have it, don't worry. It's just a variance in production, okay? You may also either have a blue or a kind of a yellow, tan yellow color bushing. Both are work equally well, just different supplier for the bushing material. So when you slide this off, there is a side with a chamfer and there is a side with a square corner. The chamfer side goes down. In other words, like this. So make sure when you pull that off that you just keep track of where it was. If you have the O-ring, pull the O-ring off, set it aside, and then take your wiper off. Okay, so if you have an issue with your cartridge, now would be the time to replace it. So you'd put the new cartridge in going forward when we reassemble. This cartridge is in good functioning condition, so we don't need to replace it. We're just going to go ahead and clean it in this case. Okay, so you can spray a little bit of degreaser on it. Go ahead and clean that good. We're going to set that aside for a minute. Take your wiper seal, clean it good. We're going to take a little bit of grease, and there's a cavity inside there. We're going to go ahead and fill that cavity. We're going to set that in place here. Now, you're going to have to go over the kind of recess here for the band bushing. So that edge is a little sharp or a little hard to get over. Don't put too much force on this. Kind of work it back and forth when the seal goes over it. That way you don't damage the wiper lip there on the seal, but you get it to overcome that stop, okay? Set that aside. Then we're going to clean our upper bushing. Again, this could be kind of a yellowy tan or blue, depending on your spec. And if you have the O-ring, clean the O-ring. Okay, we're going to take a little bit of grease and re-grease the O-ring if we had one on our post. Install that. And then again, make sure that chamfer is facing away and the square corner is facing up. So slide your bushing on. Now a little trick that I like to do to hold these in place is put a little bit of grease in these grooves. And go ahead and put your bushings back in. Again, just put them back in the exact same order that you disassembled them. If you forgot how you took them apart, the POM, which is the plastic white bushing, would always go to the top. The metal bushing, which is kind of a brass or gold color, goes to the bottom. So if you have one that has a split bushing, plastic on top, metal on the bottom. As long as you get that right, you're in good shape. This particular production just has the metallic bushing, and so that's what we're putting back in. Now this is also a tool that you'll get from your local bike shop, and this just helps you to hold all these components together when we slide everything back in place. So what we're doing is there's slots here that coincide with those. And so we want the small side facing up, and we want to pop that down. You'll have to put a little pressure so it kind of snaps around those 3 bushings. And then you'll notice that there's going to be a little space between them. So it should be even on both sides, and that snaps. Now this can slide up and down, but you're going to have to kind of hold it together because it's going to want to pop back off. Now, your band bushing, we'll set this aside for a second and we'll clean this good. You don't really need to put any grease on the band bushing because we're going to put a little bit of lube inside of here. So we'll set that aside. We're going to take our grease. Now, it's important when you grease this, there is a step here and then a second step. Those 2 surfaces you do not want to grease. Those are where your bushing and your seal press in. If you grease them, that seal will want to come back out. So don't get grease on the 2 outside lips, just down inside. So I'm going to put my hand in about a knuckle worth in, and that's going to miss those other 2 areas. And I'm just going to put some grease inside there. Okay, now I'm going to take my band bushing, and I'm going to, the easiest way I found on these, and it's going to be a little challenging to show you, but I just overlap half with one of these tools, okay? So now I have the other band here where it's the 2-piece end of it, and now I go ahead and slide this over and capture that together. Now the other thing you want to do is you're going to use your thumb and you're going to guide this up. Hopefully you can see that clearly. What I did is where those 2 pieces came together, I pushed my thumb down on it and then slid the tool to hold those. If those come up out of the groove and overlap, you'll have a really hard time getting this to go back together. So just take your time, put that up over, and I just leave a little bit of that bushing sticking out. Now I take the tool and slide it into the mast, and I just come down with it really slow, and I'll keep rotating this, and you'll see it just dropped in. So you rotate it until it drops in, and you'll feel those bushings engage. I'm keeping pressure with my 2 fingers, keep pushing it down. Okay, now that I've got it down a ways, I can take the tool out, and now everything is assembled and held together. Now I mentioned to you earlier that if you couldn't find these at your local dealer, you could possibly use like an aluminum can, something from a beer can or a soda can kind of thing. And what you would do is just cut yourself a strip about the width of this, okay? And you're just going to bend that aluminum around to make a sleeve. And then you'll just, instead of using this tool, you'll put the aluminum sleeve. So it's going to be, the sleeve is about this tall. And, you know, essentially, if you looked at it, imagine this being aluminum. You just wrap that around and then you hold it together. It's a little more clumsy to do it that way. It's more challenging, but if you cannot find this tool at your local bike shop, you can get an aluminum can and use that as a supplement. Okay, now the next step is going to be for us to seat the seal and bushing into the post itself. And you can use this plastic tool, and you would put this here, and it has the offset, and we'll press it in. Honestly, what I've found is I just make sure that I hold on to the compression rod. What I found is if you fold up a towel really good and have a good solid surface, you hit it a couple times, it seats it perfectly. And you want to just make sure when you look at it that the seal is even all the way around this edge. All right, then we're going to take our push rod, add some grease, drop that down into the cartridge. Okay, so now's a good time to look at the assembly here. Make sure that you don't have any damage, cracks, anything like that on it before you put it back together. This one all looks really good. Generally speaking, these hold up really well. I would take a little dab of grease and put on this push rod end. You don't need a ton of it, just a little bit. Okay, so then we're going to take the actuator and push it down. Now wiggle it a little bit and you'll feel it kind of click and drop down into position. You'll take your retainer clip, put it on one side, take your retainer clip, put it on the other side. And so what I like to do is once I get those in good, I'll just put it in my vise and I'll give it a tiny little squeeze. And now what that does is that pushes it from both sides perfectly evenly, and that makes the job a lot easier to get those to go in and capture. Now you want to kind of check it like this and make sure that those have gone in and caught both sides. So that way everything aligns. Now when you go to put it back in, if you look at the actuator, there's kind of a step here with these flats. If you put that into your vise, don't over tighten this. You just want it to barely touch. But if you do that and then you rotate this, you'll see that slid right in. It gives you an extra set of hands basically. Now I just like to, don't smack this really hard because these are nylon and you don't want to damage it. But just a couple quick little taps so that you know it's bottomed out. Now again, snap ring. We want to use the sharp. If you feel it, you'll feel one edge is smooth, one edge feels sharp. The sharp edge goes out when you put this in. Now, this part's a little fiddly, and I'm going to show you kind of the secret to make it happen. If you take your Allen and you put it in, and this is also going to work for you when you want to test the post. If you put a tool in here and you put it on an angle, you're going to break this part. It's not designed for that kind of a side load. It's designed to just open the valve. So what you want to do is put your hand in there, put the pin through or the tool through, and I put my thumb here and I'm holding it this way. I can pull straight up like that, okay? So that just shot it back out, but no big deal. We'll push it back down in. So that's going to open the valve that way. So put your snap ring with, again, the sharp edge out. I like to turn the open end to the side here, and I will take the tool and I will pull up, and I'm going to let the actuator, you can see, dropped on top of the snap ring. So now I'm not fighting to try to get the snap ring into there. Then I'll take my snap ring pliers and I'll snap it in, and I like to just take the tip of the plier and push that, and you'll kind of feel it click and expand out. And then one last thing before you decide to put that back in the bike is hit it on the counter a couple times and make sure that that snap ring is seated and doesn't pop out. And then if you want to test the function, again, you can put it in and you can push that and test it, make sure it feels smooth. Last thing we'll do is you'll put your clamps and your saddle back on if you took those off. And it's a good time now to put a little bit of grease on all the contact surfaces or some anti-seize compound. And make sure you torque both those bolts evenly to the torque spec that you have listed on the head of your post. So that's ready to go back on your bike.